20-something-time convicted felon who came in here and testified. He had no idea that Sean Atkins practiced common courtesy. Sean Atkins saw what happened, and he had the foresight to take down this defendant's tag number, walk into that gas station, and give it to Lillian Christensen. This defendant had no knowledge of that. For all he knew, nobody knew he was the shooter. He had no reason to hide his car when he got to the hotel. He had no reason to hide it when he got home. Oh, and he makes no mention of a firearm to Rhonda Rauer. Wouldn't that be the first thing you tell the love of your life when she gets back in that car with you? I shot someone, but they had a gun pointed at me. She testified yesterday. He made no mention of that. Never. The first time he mentioned it to her is in a letter, December 5th, 2012. And this letter's in evidence when he says, he mentioned in passing that I had made no mention of a gun to you, based on your testimony to the prosecutors. He asked what I had told you, and I then realized that we hadn't really discussed what had happened, as we were more concerned with whether or not anyone was hurt. This defendant was not concerned whether or not anyone was hurt. When he found out he killed someone, he did nothing. And the only time he mentions to Rhonda Rauer, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you there was a gun involved, is when he learns that she has talked to police and the prosecutor. As Mr. Stroll pointed out, that was me. That's when he realizes, whoops, never told you about that. These are his actions because what he did was premeditated. It was not self-defense. Now I'll explain to you briefly what self-defense instructions are. But let me be very clear again. There was no gun in the Durango. The only person who says there was is that defendant. His statements are uncorroborated. And he's not even consistent with what he saw. But you'll be instructed on the justifiable use of deadly force. And you'll be instructed that the use of deadly force is justifiable if Michael Dunn reasonably believes that the force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself while resisting another's attempt to murder him, another's any attempt to commit aggravated assault, aggravated battery, or attempted murder upon him, and any attempt to commit aggravated assault, aggravated battery, or attempted murder upon or in any vehicle occupied by him. This defendant was not justified. He did not have a reasonable belief that Jordan Davis was about to kill him or cause great bodily harm to him. Jordan Davis was inside his own car. And if he got out at all, he certainly didn't come close to this defendant. The cars were too close for him to do that. Now, you'll also be instructed that the law of self-defense goes on to say that a person is justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or another, or the imminent commission of aggravated assault, aggravated battery, attempted murder, or murder against himself or another. And the self-defense instruction continues and says that in deciding whether the defendant was justified in the use of deadly force, you must judge him by the circumstances by which he was surrounded at the time that force was used. Now, the danger facing the defendant need not have been actual. However, to justify the use of deadly force, the appearance of danger must have been so real that a reasonably cautious and prudent person, under the same circumstances, would have believed that the danger could be avoided only through the use of that deadly force. Based upon appearances, the defendant must have actually believed that the danger was real. It doesn't just let you assume something might happen. Was this defendant's behavior that of a cautious and reasonably prudent person? I think not. The number of shots he fired, the pattern of those shots in that car. If there was a gun in that SUV, wouldn't they have shot first once they saw him reaching for his gun? If Jordan Davis had a shotgun in his lap and they see the defendant going for his pistol, wouldn't that make sense? There were no shots ever fired at this defendant. And from the surveillance tape, his series of shots was about 10 seconds. That's a long time in the scheme of things. There was no gun or weapon ever found. And that wasn't because of shoddy police work. That was because there wasn't one. The boys didn't have a gun. They didn't have a stick. This defendant, in firing his shots, even missed one of the rounds. He was open firing in an open, crowded parking lot. And then the defendant, as I said earlier, when he gets Rhonda Rower back in the car, if he's so fearful, why on earth does he put his gun back in his glove box? As he told you all, he thought they were coming back to get him again. Is that an act of someone who's truly in fear? That he puts his gun back? He thought they were a car full of gangsters. He thought there were more of them. He thought every car after that was a red SUV. And once again, his behavior after the shooting. And as I stated, that the danger could only be avoided through force. The defendant's the one who rolled his window back down. He's the one who re-engaged these boys. He's the one who's brandishing his gun. The fear that he had of that shotgun wasn't reasonable because there wasn't a shotgun. Michael Dunn does not get to just assume Jordan Davis had a gun and assume that he was pointing it at him. What did he tell you from the stand? He said he thought he saw a barrel come up out of Jordan's window. From my recollection, I don't remember him ever saying that gun was pointed directly at him. And that he heard it slam against the door. Michael Dunn couldn't even see what Jordan Davis was reaching for, if he in fact was reaching for anything, because the car door is in the way. He couldn't see through that car door. And then, according to his testimony, Jordan opens that back door. And what did Michael Dunn tell you? He told you that he could see Jordan's head over the door frame. He could see his feet on the ground. But then at some point, he didn't know where Jordan Davis went. He never saw the shotgun again. That's a fact. The only time he claims he saw one was when it was sticking up out of that window. This defendant didn't know what Jordan Davis was going to do when he stepped out of that car. He was assuming. And self-defense does not let you assume. Nine shots into that car. The defendant left the scene unscathed. Jordan Davis had been out of that back seat when he was shot. Car doors don't close by themselves when they're reversing. Somebody who's been shot 3 times with a bullet through all of your organs doesn't close the door behind them and get in the car. That back door would have scratched the side of Michael Dunn's car. For a fact. They were parked so close. And when Tommy Sorens pulled out, he pulled right around behind Michael Dunn's car. There is no way Jordan Davis's door closed on its own or by Jordan Davis. And once again, an example of why Jordan Davis was inside that car. The 3 shots to kill Jordan Davis. Was it really self-defense? Once again, there was no gun, so it's not. But if it were, which I anticipate is the argument the defense will be making, 10 rounds, 3 of which when the car is fleeing? And after, this defendant repositioned himself. He was in such fear that he opened the door, and in his words, he actually got out of the car and walked down, I guess, to the middle of the street and kept shooting. That's what one of his letters says. The SUV pulled forward and I got out of my car and ran a few feet behind my car. I started firing on them as they fled, aiming specifically for the center line of the vehicle. I stopped shooting when they were too far away for me to hit them accurately. He didn't take cover when, in his words, the car that he was in such fear of is driving off and possibly going to be shooting back. He testified he never saw a gun as that car drove away. He never heard any threats as the car drove away. He never was shot at. This defendant suffered no injuries. And then he left the scene, not calling 911. If he was in such fear of a car full of gangsters, wouldn't he call the police to at least say, hey, there's a red SUV out there and they have a gun in it. You might want to go find them. They're dangerous. He doesn't call anyone. And no mention of a weapon to Rhonda Rower. None. And Mr. Strolla tried to ask her, you're under a lot of strain and stress with this situation. Wouldn't that be the first words out of her mouth if her fiance told her, oh, the boys had a gun? Wouldn't that be the bit that she probably remembers the most from what he told her? She was very adamant on that stand. Although probably unwilling to come in here, she did. Once you got in the car and headed to the hotel, did the defendant ever tell you about a firearm? Nope. Did he ever tell you about a weapon? Nope. Once you were at the hotel, for what, 12 hours? Did the defendant ever tell you about a firearm from the SUV? Nope. Did he ever tell you about a weapon of any kind? No. And then 2.5-hour drive down to their home in Brevard, knowing somebody had died. Did the defendant ever tell you about a firearm? No. Did he ever tell you about any weapon he saw? No.